Hi everyone, welcome to the Edtech podcast, the show about education innovation in and out of the classroom. What have you been innovating all over this week? Share at Podcast Edtech, and if you're feeling really fancy, you should leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/the Edtech podcast, because next week will be the listeners episode where I share some fun stats and listener messages about the podcast after 1 year going out every week. There'll also be loads to look out for during that week, so keep your eyes peeled. We're talking infographics, surveys, crowdfunding campaigns, the whole shebang. In other news, I'm very excited to announce that the Japan Prize will be sharing their message over the next 6 weeks with the EdTech podcast. The Japan Prize is part of Japan's state broadcaster NHK and was set up in 1965 to recognise educational resources, especially those with an audiovisual focus. It's free to enter, there are cash prizes, and the top nominees are flown out to the Tokyo Awards ceremony. If this sounds of interest, go to www.nhk.or.jp/jp-prize/English. That's where you can enter, and you can also check out their Facebook group. In the meantime, here's a snippet from my conversation with Yuki Yoshida, the Deputy Secretary General of the NHK Japan Prize, with more details. Hello.
Hello, good morning to you.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, and you?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, we had a really nice weekend in London. It was very sunny. Perhaps you could explain to listeners what the Japan Prize is.
Okay, my pleasure. First of all, NHK is Japan's public broadcaster. We usually produce almost every genre of content, like TV programs and radio programs. But also, NHK put much importance on education. And one of the international brands to represent that value, or almost expressing our how determined we are about quality or equal access to education, is the Japan Prize. It's international competition for educational media, and so we launched this competition in 1965. So we welcome all of the audiovisual content, not only TV programs and videos and films, but also we welcome all the digital contents as well, such as website and games and applications. So this is pretty much about what we are.
And so in terms of who should enter, are there any particular types of digital companies, edtech companies, who should definitely enter? And are there any that you're thinking in the future may be eligible but aren't this time around?
Okay, so because we are public media broadcaster, now we're welcoming the content which has any type of audio-visual contents in their services. So like website or across, even though it's a cross-media content, like teaching kids as programming or coding, the content should have some sort of audio-visual content in that service. So maybe some sort of like a robot who are controlled by the coding, but if that robot doesn't have audio-visual contents at the moment, I think I'm sorry to have to tell you that I think we have to wait for a little more to come to welcome those contents.
So it's the audio-visual bit that's the important aspect.
That's right, yes.
Okay, and then is there a cost to enter?
No, there is no entry fees, so any contents are welcome. And we already opened the call for entry for this year. So you can just simply visit our website, and we have all the entry rules and entry forms. Links are there.
Okay, great. And then the deadline is the 30th of June this year, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
So until that light, we have about 2 steps to enter. One is the filling out the online entry form. And after we accept the entry form, we will send you the email to your the links to upload your contents. And so finishing the uploading the contents, it should be done by the deadline, which is just like you said, at end of the June. So that's www.nhk.or.jp/prize.
if people enter and they're successful, what's the benefit? What's the next step if they go on to be nominated or win?
Right. Okay. So after the deadline, we have a preliminary selection process during the summer. We are announcing the finalist on September the 1st. And after you are nominated, some of the category, not all of the category, but you are welcome to present your works in Tokyo. Especially for the Edtech listener, I think it's one of the good news, I hope, is that one category which is heavily focusing on digital content, which we are calling Creative Frontier category. These are 5 or 6 finalists are usually nominated as a finalist. And these finalists are invited by NHK. We are paying your travel cost. You are invited to Tokyo to present your project in front of the final jurors. And so that will, yeah. So you have a free ticket to Tokyo.
Okay, fantastic. And then the award giving ceremony, that is in the autumn. Is that right?
Yes, the final selection will be scheduled from October 11th to October 18th. The final date, October 18th, is the award ceremony. So this is the one day which we, announce all the winners. And we have a best of the best prize, which is called the Grand Prix Japan Prize. So these are, presented all the winners. And we have a prize money. Each of the best category, we have $2,000 for the winner. And also we have $5,000 for the Grand Prix winners. So I think I hope it's a good information for you.
Yeah, no, I think it's very good. I think a lot of people will be excited and interested to enter. So thank you very much for sharing, Yuki. Do you have any final message to potential entrants?
Well, we all believing in the power of media and the power of technology to change the world for the better place. And the Japan Prize is a very unique place for those people who get together and discuss how the media can communicate to the world in the learning aspect. So we're really looking forward to your submissions, and we're really looking forward to welcoming you to Tokyo in October.
That's great. So thanks very much, Yuki.
Thank you, Sophie.
Awesome. I hope that got you excited. If you're not eligible to enter, make sure you recommend the prize to your favourite edu resources out there. This week's episode is also brought to you by sponsors Class Central and Glisser EDU, with a few words on them later on. Now, on to this week. Publishing content and Edtech. It's a subject we keep returning to on the podcast, and this week I'm in conversation with Steve Connolly, Group Digital Director at Hodder, Andrea Carr, founder of Rising Stars, and Filippo Aroffo, Program and Portfolio Manager for McGraw-Hill Education. We'll be asking such pressing questions as, is there such a thing as a traditional publisher? Is EdTech self-serving? Why is metadata so important? What's the story behind Outstanding Achievement in ICT Education BET Award winner Andrea Carr? And why is the word publisher toxic enough people recoil in horror as if it's shorthand for an STD? I hope you enjoy, friends, and if you're heading out to ASU GSV Summit, drop me a line as I'll be out there too. If you're heading off for a long weekend, listening to this in real time, have a great one, and check out the EdTech Podcast Spring playlist on Spotify to get you in the weekend mood. So I've made my way across to Embankment, and I'm here with Steve Connolly, who is Group Digital Director, and you head up the further education part of the business, which we can go into later on at Hodder Education. And Steve, I suppose when people are listening to this podcast, we're sort of in the future because all of the past recordings were at BET, but we didn't have time to catch up there. So that's given you the chance to listen to the Future Book episode, which looked at some of the publishers and what EdTech are doing. And I think what I found really interesting in your comments having listened to that when you were walking your Labrador or Labradors, was that, you were disputing that term of traditional publishers, which I would love to delve into. So what was your kind of thinking when you heard that episode?
Well, I was at the Future Book session, and my opening gambit was I was the dinosaur in the room along with several other dinosaurs, the Hoddosaurus rex. And we are traditional publishers in the sense that we publish books, but I think that the whole premise of innovation is an interesting one, because we've been innovating for 10, 15 years, and we've put in significant amounts of investment of our own money. It's not investor money as such, it's money that we have made from the sales of our textbooks and from our online, and we've reinvested it. And it's not a case of saying, well, we innovate in the market, or we're trying to create a market for a market's sake. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it business to business or business to consumer. The challenge with business to consumer is all about exposure of product and technology. And I think that's what some of my colleagues who are in the edtech space were driving at when they're talking about, bring the consumer to water and let them drink from the fountain of edtech. We sell ostensibly to schools, but that doesn't mean to say we don't innovate. And I would point to any number of services where they're content-led, and actually quite traditional content-led, but have been innovative in the way they do things. GCSE Pod, to me, is a good example of that. They meet a need, which is revision, which is universal, doesn't go away, it's absolutely central. They leverage a business-to-business model, but in and of itself, it is innovative because they spotted a way of tapping into personal devices that consumers, i.e. students, were carrying around in their pockets, and they made it possible for schools to buy into a whole online revision package which did something different from the traditional books. Now, that doesn't mean to say the books aren't relevant. They are. I would contest that you put a book in front of someone for 10 minutes a day for 10 weeks before their exam, and they'll probably go up a grade, which is what I've heard many other edtech providers and assessment providers claim with their solutions. But traditional doesn't mean lack of innovation. It just means that we are part of a very established ecosystem, and that we are a trusted brand very often. And I would like to sort of explore whether edtech in and of itself needs to be innovative in terms of what it does and in terms of the needs it's serving for its own sake, or whether the need is driven by the market. That's the important thing to me. Yeah,
so whether it's self-serving, sort of looking for problems that don't exist and that kind of thing. I guess what's interesting to me, so you work within a publisher, and as you say, it's sort of an established ecosystem, but your role is at, focusing on digital. For you, what are the kind of things that you're looking at in terms of services or, where publishing might be going? And I guess the wider background to this is why we tried to connect at BET is I'm interested in how publishers see that world, because I think some publishers have attended the event, not attended, and obviously at the moment there's publishers' fortunes are kind of variable. So I just was interested from someone driving the digital agenda within a publisher where your focus might be.
Well, my line, actually my hat in Hodder spans many areas, and I'm a book publisher by background, but you're right, my focus is ostensibly digital. My view is that accessibility of content and access to content in whatever format schools and students want to purchase or access it is absolutely vital. And we put a lot of emphasis about 4 or 5 years ago into our workflow around our traditional textbook publishing so that we could deliver enhanced e-textbooks of any title that we produce. And that sounds like it's a simple challenge, but it's not like the trade where you're basically turning a linear novel into a reflowable text file, which is what an EPUB is. It was much more about how do we take an integrated textbook, give it a linear sequence that makes sense so that it can be manipulated, it can be customized, it can be enhanced, and more to the point, it can be read on any device. And that sounds like a straightforward proposition, but actually in terms of the way we typeset our books, and all publishers typeset their books through necessity. It actually isn't. And so we put a lot of emphasis in our workflow, and that also related to the way in which we describe and form our digital content for teachers, so the resources that they use in the applications that we put out. One of the things we wanted to make sure was that it could work in a number of contexts, lessons they create, their VLEs, online, offline in the textbooks. So it's very dull, but metadata and the structure of content matters enormously, and we've put a hell of a lot of effort into making sure our editors and our authors understand the structure of our content and how we need to be able to disseminate it and share it.
Okay, and then the second part, so the further education. And I know on email I mentioned that Ian Ashburn, who's head of Association of Colleges, was the first interviewee on the Edtech podcast. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about what the focus is there, because I think certainly within Edtech, quite a lot of the focus is usually on K-12 or higher education. So just interested to know your thoughts on that area of things.
Well, in further education, the big challenge is budget. Yeah. Everyone talks about budget in schools, but you imagine the outcry if overnight the government said no A-level child will be given a textbook by a school. They have to find the money to support themselves, and they have to find the money to be able to buy their own resources. So this is a massive driver in further education, but it's also about whether the needs of vocational learning are different from those of the more traditional academic routes. And there is a convergence in some areas, but in many respects they are different. So we're looking at the way in which a student in the workplace or in college, whether they're following technical routes or apprenticeships, can combine both the traditional information that is conveyed well in textbooks with more practical and virtual learning techniques that really allow them to, I guess, refine and understand the process that they're learning that is relevant to the strand of learning that they're in, the sector that they're learning for. So we're trying to combine good information, sound information that has authority and that has been verified by experts and by awarding bodies to be correct in relation to the sector requirements, but also that there are different learning techniques embedded into the digital solutions that we put out with textbooks, in e-textbooks, standalone, that demonstrate technique, allow them to test their knowledge and understanding of technique, and to a degree actually practice that technique, although I would still contest that that's best done in the workplace in a practical environment, and there's only so much you can do in a virtual simulation. Okay, so
that's what I was going to get to, so things like VR and I'm guessing sort of video content to help sort of learn in modules and those kind of things. But
well, we put a lot of effort and money into video, and one of the things you can do within video is test understanding of technique as the video plays, so that's an obvious thing to do. VR is an interesting one, isn't it? VR is everywhere at BET.
Yes.
And, I went swimming with a virtual white shark, and it was really, very interesting and enjoyable and wonderful. But I think there is a natural barrier to VR, which is, in the context of the learning space, someone is covering their eyes. And that, to me, is a connection between a tutor and a learner is a barrier. If you're talking about sort of standalone or distance learning, independent learning, then perhaps it has a place, part to play. I think augmented reality, where you're combining maybe 2D diagrams with the ability to manipulate and witness 3D models and actually interact with them, might be actually more appropriate. And of course, they're looking at ways to render augmented reality that doesn't require the wearing of a headset.
Yes.
And that is really interesting to me.
Okay. And then how about your group role? So, thinking about publishing and, different regions and how they go about education. Are there any particular territory areas that you're looking at the moment that are sort of priority over others, perhaps?
Well, we have businesses in Singapore and the Caribbean, but we have publishing relations in India, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in North America. So, we're quite widespread. You were asking earlier about where we're putting our focus. Assessment is a big driver. I think a couple of my colleagues who you've interviewed in previous podcasts have talked about the importance of data and quality of data. And that's a universal need, actually. That's what any teacher worth their salt will measure a student by, not necessarily just in terms of performance, but identifying areas of strength and weakness in learning and being able to benchmark them either on a local standard or on a national or international standard. So that's an area we're looking at. We've just launched with OCR Exam Board an iteration of our assessment bank software that we produced called Exam Builder for them. And on the surface, it's a very simple exam paper builder that teachers can interrogate a bank of questions, create their own paper, output it. But I think it's got the potential to be a sort of central way of being able to iteratively use assessment as a way of informing teaching and benchmarking pupil performance so that they're well prepared for their examinations. And, in many respects, that's the key focus of teachers at GCSE and A-level or on the same equivalent qualifications internationally. But we're looking specifically at partnerships in the Caribbean, in Singapore at the moment, and we're actually piloting some digital initiatives around ebooks and reuse of our resources, but also assessment questions. And we have a big standardised assessment list for literacy and numeracy in the UK, which has the potential to be used internationally as well. And we provide all sorts of marking and reporting tools around that free of charge to the users. So they can get some very valuable data and reports out of that.
And I'm interviewing Andrea Carr later on today. So Rising Stars is now part of Hodder or part of Hachette, or all part of the same big family?
Rising Stars is very much part of Hodder Education.
Yes.
It forms a central part of the primary business. And actually it was a phenomenally good fit for both companies in a way, because we had a standardised assessment list, which was something that Rising Stars didn't have, but they have a lot of formative progress tests and optional tests that they use termly with teachers, and they're used in a very widespread way. And what we were able to do was leverage some of the technologies we already had and adapt them and change them to deliver some of the core services that Rising Stars were very keen to put out into the market. And that's been successful. We've had some really good success with the launch of Assessment Bank, which is the bespoke paper builder. And we have supported both the paper tests that they produce, but also our standardised tests through the Rising Stars assessment site, which allows them teachers to input data and get some very valuable reports out of it. And we're seeing massive take up of that at the moment. So it's been really interesting. And there's a big reading scheme coming out this year called Reading Planet from Rising Stars, which has been invested in heavily by Hachette. But that's been backed by a big digital initiative as well with, Reading Planet library, e-library with assessment built in and tablet compatibility and the rest.
And finally, for you, in terms of your own philosophy around education and just thinking about what's had an influence on you, are there any particular books or resources or people that you would point others to? Someone that's had an impact on you in your life as to your philosophy within Hodder Education, or a book that you may have read that you like to go back to?
Well, one that I do go back to a fair amount, I can't remember who the author is, but it's Don't Make Me Think. Okay. And it was written around user interface. Now, that was just purely from a technology point of view. And the reason I've found that useful was because we sometimes make assumptions about our market that they should know something. They should know how to do X, Y, and Z. And actually, my principle is that teachers will use something that they need to use for a really sound outcome. That's what drives Edtech adoption. It's not desire. And so if you put barriers up in terms of the usability of your applications, even if they're free of charge or they're producing high value information, they won't use them. Mm. They want to be able to go into the staff room for 10 minutes, get on their iPad, get on their laptop, be able to do what they need to do, know that it works, and quite happily go to the next lesson where they've got to, teach the year sixes some numeracy in preparation for their national test.
Yes.
So time is very precious to them. And I think that's what drives everything for me is, can you save them time? Can you service a real need? And can that then elicit a good strategy, a sound strategy for both benchmarking performance, looking at pupil progression, and actually informing what your next steps of effective intervention and teaching will be? That's the magic triangle, as far as I'm concerned.
Next up, word from Class Central, which, if you're into geeking out over online learning and MOOC reports like I am, you'll probably already know about. Unless you've been asleep, MOOCs or massive online open courses are changing the way we experience higher and further education and workplace learning. With significant online courses available, gaining insight into this fast-paced world is worth spending time on, especially for those implicated by such changes. That's where Class Central comes in. Not only does it list hundreds of courses, and importantly including non-profit courses as well as the big Ivy League unis, but the MOOC Report blog has some excellent analysis on what's up, down, new or just slightly left field. I came across Class Central when I was preparing for a Department for International Trade webinar and found it invaluable. Since then, I've met the founder out at South by Southwest EDU and he was excited to share the resource with all of you. So definitely go and check it out at www.class-central.com/report and let me know what you think. I found my way to the McGraw-Hill Education stand and I'm delighted to be here with Filippo Aroffo.
Yes.
Is that an Italian name?
Yeah, it's in Italian. I'm Italian.
Excellent.
Yes.
And which part of Italy are you from?
I come from Milan.
Okay, great. And so Filippo is the Program and Portfolio Manager for SEM, so Science, Engineering and Maths. And so my intrigue really as well is into thinking about the publishers, the publishing world and the Edtech world and how they're coming together. And it would be fair to say that publishers are sort of working out what Edtech is for them. So, you have some of the publishers acquiring AI companies and others sort of innovating in different ways. It's good to see McGraw-Hill Education here. So what does that mean? Like, what's your goal here at BET this week?
As you might know, we used to be a publisher and we have an history of 125 years, more than 125 years as a publisher. But now we like to call each other a learning science company because all our efforts are around learning science. So all that, it's the core of our products at the moment is the learning science behind. And being at here at BET to launch our new platform Connect2 because we're investing in the learning science. It's not about textbooks anymore. It's about helping students to reach their potential and to reach their outcomes. So it's all about learning outcomes and supporting instructors to help their students to reach their potential.
And so primarily, as I understand it, that's for higher education institutions.
Yeah, our Connect2 product is for higher education, yes.
And I was speaking to your colleague, so the way I kind of understood it, so it's sort of an LMS, but where all the content is already preloaded, so it negates needing to perhaps connect or subscribe to lots of different individual journals. Is that right?
It's a complete course framework. So what we provide to instructors it's not only the content for their courses, but also the platform to deliver that content. So the idea is to provide them a complete course solution off the shelf. They're going to find all the content built around not the traditional chapters, but the learning outcomes. So if you have a subject, let's say it's social psychology, you're going to have for that specific course specific learning objectives you want to achieve with your course. So we built around those all the content that you might need as an instructor to teach that specific course. So the structure of this course is usually in topics, and around the topic you're going to have the learning objectives, and for that topic you're going to have all that as an instructor you need. So starting from an adaptive reading experience, that is our smart book, going to content for seminars, for presentations, and all the assessment you need for your students. Not only the traditional multiple choice question or test, but also discussions, questions, and essays. And we provide this to you as an instructor together with an implementation guide, because these courses have been built and designed by instructional designers and subject matter experts. And as an instructor, you're going to find all the support you need to build your course.
You're by the Higher Education Networking Lounge here. Lots of the institutions that you're speaking to, I would imagine that most of them either have already MOOCs or thinking about, the kind of step towards MOOCs. So does this work as a kind of stepping stone for institutions as they're evolving? I'm just thinking about, where they had traditional courses and perhaps where they're thinking about doing innovative ways of connecting learning materials with students, how that fits in on that spectrum.
Well, the first thing we did before launching this platform, and when we started working on this platform, was to listen to the instructors in higher education institutions. So what we heard from them is that they have some huge pain points. One is time, and the other one is learning outcomes from the students. So they have a lot of pressure from their institution to have better results from their students. So when we started designing the new Connect 2, the idea was to help them and to provide them the tools to save time in building their course and managing their courses, having the support they need to design this course. That's why we engage with instructional designers, because usually instructors, they just need to build the course, but they don't have the support to do that, and maybe they don't have the skills to do that. And on the other side, the pain point was the learning results from the students. That's why we provided them with adaptive experience and the assessment they need. So the idea for us is to start from the needs of the instructors and to listen to their pain points and their needs.
And what kind of conversations have you had with some of the higher education institutions that are here? Who have you heard from, which kind of universities and that kind of thing?
We had a conversation with all kind of universities, and we just had a session here with our digital faculty consultants from Liverpool University or Coventry University. There are institutions we're working together to understand how they can integrate and use these new products and new platforms in their courses, and how we can help them support to meet their goals.
And how did you get into all of this with McGraw-Hill, and how long have you been here, and what did you do before?
Actually, my background is science, so my degree is material science, and I always loved books and education. So when I first saw the ad for a position as an editorial assistant 11 years ago in Italy, I thought it was a good way to combine my love for science together with my love for education and books. At the time, it was still a book business.
Yes.
So I joined McGraw-Hill almost 11 years ago, and I've been with McGraw-Hill for 10 years back in Italy, and then I joined the UK team last year.
And so now do you live in London?
Yes.
And how do you find that?
Oh, exciting. Just exciting.
You like it?
Yeah, it's a very exciting city, buzzing city.
Yeah.
A bit tiring sometimes, but it's amazing to be here.
Well, it's very nice to speak to you, Filippo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. I'm here with Andrea Carr, who is founder at Rising Stars. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you for having me.
I guess why we wanted to reconnect, so to find out a little bit about your experience in Edtech, and mostly because I think you also won the BET Award for Outstanding Achievement in ICT Education. And I could sort of see, I mean, we haven't met yet, so I could see the warmth that came through all of the Twitter follow-up and that kind of thing from quite a broad range of people in the industry, which made me just really keen to get an interview locked down and to sort of share with people who perhaps are new to the sector or haven't crossed paths with you yet, to find out a little bit about who you are and what you get up to. And then secondly, just to find out a little bit more again around sort of Rising Stars and where EdTech, education and publishing intersect.
Sure.
So to go right back to the beginning, perhaps you could let us know about how you got into this space and setting up Rising Stars right back in the beginning.
Sure. It was more or less by accident, actually. I'm married to an ex-teacher, and he was struggling with the new national tests, or the demands of the new national tests as a Year 6 teacher. And Rising Stars' very first products were a revision book for English and a revision book for maths, specifically aimed at helping teachers get their children over what was then the level 5 target, the level 5 score, if you like, in the test at the end of primary. So it was all about, as it still is, identifying a very specific area of need and plugging it or supporting schools with it. It wasn't rocket science. It was all very hand to mouth, but the result was a business, really. That's how it started. And as many people know, marketing sort of underpinned and continues to. It certainly then underpinned what Rising Stars did. So testing ideas using direct mail to assess response rates to ideas has been a critical part of the whole publishing process. And that's very interesting because it's a great leveller, because if schools don't put their hands in their pockets and buy, then you probably don't have a product that's going to work.
That's very interesting. And so what were you doing before you launched Rising Stars?
I was actually working in publishing, so I was in trade publishing. So actually being back in the Hachette fold where Rising Stars now finds itself is a bit of a sort of a flashback to where I was before. So I actually worked for Octopus, which is one of the Hachette companies. So I worked on, over my time, children's books, fiction, adult, non-fiction, reference.
And so did any of those contributors then come and do product content?
No, not really. Most of them were sort of either famous chefs, cooks, TV personalities. No, we started very much with educationalists, and many of our authors still are. We draw from the teaching profession more often than not. So that's a great thing about Rising Stars. It actually has built some new authors from the teaching profession who continue to teach, but do writing and product development for us.
Absolutely. And so going back to the market testing thing, because I think that's really interesting. So I would imagine direct mail to, even if it's just the English education primary community, would be very expensive. So
it is.
Yeah.
But marketing and selling product is expensive, and so often businesses forget that when they're modelling their own new businesses. Certainly, it wouldn't be unreasonable for a business to be spending, up to 20% of revenues on that whole process, and so so it should be really. So we've always built that into our business model. Knowing that marketing is fundamental to the success of a product means that you price accordingly. Obviously, we still have to be sensitive to the market and what it can afford, and we know that that's pretty tough, particularly schools here. But you can't skimp on marketing. You just can't.
So marketing today, what does that look like compared to when you launched?
Surprisingly similar. You'd think, wouldn't you, that actually schools would have moved in the same way that perhaps as we as consumers have moved. But, experience would say that it's still worth putting things in the post to teachers, particularly if you're saying absolutely the right thing to them and you're targeting them in the right way. So it may be to then, their name, the named contact you have. But that's supplemented, obviously, by what you do online and ensuring that that one's website is absolutely top notch and that the content is easily accessible and that teachers can find the information they need. But certainly introducing ideas to schools, in my experience, even now, can effectively be done by some high quality direct marketing, which often means putting something in the post.
Just going back to the awards, so the Outstanding Achievement in ICT Education, this is probably going to be a tricky one because it's kind of blowing your own trumpet in some way. But what was the main driver behind you winning that, do you think, or that the judges reflected on?
Oh, I don't know. I was a complete surprise, and I was just very, very honoured and all those things. I think probably part of it is because I've always given great importance to partnerships and working alongside other organisations for a common cause. So, some of the things I'm most proud of are, for example, working with Havering Local Authority to develop an ICT curriculum and then a computing curriculum for primary schools. That was a project that involves and still does digital and print-based content to support primary teachers in becoming competent in teaching curriculum, in the use of ICT in the classroom to develop technology skills with children from reception through to Key Stage 3 actually. And that was a great project because it meant that we were using schools to trial, develop materials. We were using the expertise, amazing expertise in a local authority. We were generating revenues for that local authority and that local authority team, which is hugely important, particularly over recent years when, as we know, funding for teams such as theirs is, has been very hard to find. And we produced a great product. So partnerships like that, similar with Computing at School, with other local authorities to develop assessment products, and organisations such as the Geography Association and London Grid for Learning and so on.
Yeah, actually, I saw on your website, so you kind of aggregate content from those partners as well.
They quality assured, if you like.
Yeah.
It means it provides revenue streams for these organisations too. And for me, Rising Stars is only as good as the people that we work with to develop our content, to develop our tools. And if we can associate ourselves with those organisations who have that expertise, have those specialisms, and we can work together to the common good and it's a benefit to all of us, then that's a great way of working.
So your main focus is primary schools.
Yeah.
And obviously they're less academised than secondary. Are you finding, as some primary schools go through an academisation process, that it's, is that disrupting perhaps your previous ways of communicating them that you mentioned, or how's that lay of the land going?
Okay, well, my experience to date with multi-academy trusts is that they more often than not are looking for solutions around assessment, which is good because we're very strong in assessment. So the larger trusts are looking for solutions to help them aggregate data, and that's a big area for us right now. So we provide the assessments, we give them the tools for marking and reporting, but give head offices the tools for looking at data in a more aggregated way across their trusts. The interest we've had so far in other areas have been around things like maths mastery, where we've got resources and training, wraparound training that we can make available to groups of schools where they can buy, obviously exploiting economies of scale on pricing and so on. And also on computing, where we can also provide that sort of wraparound service of resources, online professional development and face-to-face training. So to date with it will impact on the way any of us in this industry interacts with schools. If you've got a healthy academy trust, you're going to be looking for economies of scale and efficiencies, and therefore you're going to be looking to negotiate with suppliers on goods and services. But experience to date, we're just in the early stages, and there are not many trusts who are really, really in that space as yet. But it will happen, and of course we will. We want to work with them to make it advantageous for them. And
then I was thinking about your comment about obviously the budgets in the UK are a bit stretched, and you mentioned sort of Havering before, and I visited a primary school out there when I think it was like a Japanese Edtech Association were in town visiting. And I wondered and obviously with the expertise and the resources you mentioned around computing and Japan going through their computing curriculum process now, whether Rising Stars, what your international footprint's like.
Yeah, well, with computing and that programme, actually, we've had a lot of success. And in fact, we're working with a Japanese publisher at the moment at looking to version what we've done for the UK market for theirs. So we're also doing the same in Vietnam and Spain, Portugal. So our education system here was at the forefront of the introduction of computing, teaching and learning in schools. And it's not surprising that we've got many countries around the world looking to us for support as they do the same.
Absolutely. I think what would be really great as well is we haven't actually. So in a nutshell, Rising Stars. What for people that aren't familiar with it.
Well, we're a primary education publisher. A publisher often feels like the wrong word these days because people associate publishing with books, but we're much more than that. We're content and tools for the teaching of the curriculum, but also assessing the curriculum. We are very market-led, and we seek to respond to what teachers need. We spend a lot of time in focus groups, just listening, not presenting what we're doing, but actually listening to what teachers are worrying about, presenting very early ideas, and actually it will almost always be in those focus groups where a gem of an idea will or a germ of an idea, I should say, will be discussed. Yeah, hopefully a gem, and that's where it starts. But it's very much about listening, and I think there are edtech startups who absolutely understand that. But I would say that if you are starting a business in education, then actually really taking time out to listen to your market, to trial things, not to assume anything, because they will always surprise you. And as I said earlier, making sure that you understand the cost of reaching your market in this country, and in most others, but that you build that in from the start, and working with other people and being open and create partnerships, because actually it's a great industry to be in, and everyone does like sharing, because we're in it for, ultimately we've got to make profit to keep going, but we're in it for a good cause too.
Yeah. And I mean, what was your own educational experience like? And did that have any kind of, was it formative in terms of what you've done with your career?
Goodness, I'd never really thought about that. Not really. I don't know. I think I probably had a pretty ordinary experience in schools. My children have grown up with Rising Stars. So I've got twins who are 14, and they were born actually a month after Rising Stars' first 2 books came out. So that was an interesting year. So I suppose their experience has informed me. They're all now in secondary schools. So but my heart is still very much in primary.
The other question I always ask everyone is whether there are any books or resources or people that had an impact and an influence on how you think and your own sort of philosophy that you've carried through life. Could be anything, doesn't have to be educational books.
No, sure. I think my experience actually working in trade publishing taught me a lot. I worked for Reed, what was Reed Publishing, the consumer division, and I got an amazing training in finance, even though I'm not an accountant by any stretch, but it taught me the importance of understanding cash flow and understanding what a balance sheet means, and those very important things, particularly when you're a big business. But actually I applied what I knew even when we were tiny. So having those disciplines in place, having learnt about those and actually use some of those disciplines early, I think really helped ensure that we remained robust as we were growing, and without the need for any significant investment too. So yeah, that's probably my best answer, as you've just thrown it at me without me having. There's lots of people. I could cite numerous people as well who've obviously been, including my ex-chairman Philip Walters, who has had a huge role to play in Rising Stars over the last few years.
And as someone that's now sort of back into the publishing fold in inverted commas, what do you see if you look forward over the next sort of, 3 to 5 years for edtech or for publishing, and where this may all go?
Well, as I was chair of BISA for 3 years, and during that time, we set up the Launchpad initiative for BISA, which I'm really proud of, because I think that's a great part of BISA, and I know there's some fantastic businesses that have benefited from that. I sincerely hope that we continue to see that part of BISA grow, because I think the networking opportunities that it provides are immense. and important. I think what we'll see is larger established businesses working more regularly with smaller startups. I would certainly like to see more investment in startups happening on the part of the larger established businesses. And that's something I think as an industry we ought to be encouraging and seeing how we can model and sharing good practice of where that happens and where that makes a difference. So I think we've got a lot to learn. Bigger businesses have a lot to learn from those upcoming organisations, those upcoming brains, those ideas. And equally, we have a lot to offer in terms of our experience.
Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
In other news this week, a big shout out to this week's sponsors, Glisser EDU. This is an easy one for me as I regularly use Glisser at events because I frankly find it a bit weird when there are people staring at you but you ignore them. Glisser is an audience engagement platform and they also have an education offer for socialising lectures where they take regular PowerPoint or keynote presentations and push each slide out live to students' mobile devices as they are presented. Professors, administrators and students get valuable data on where information is really engaging or needs reworking, and staff and students can interact through the deck. You can check them out at glisser.com/student-engagement. Thanks for listening, everyone. Don't forget to leave your voicemail for us at speakpipe.com/the Edtech podcast. And we'll be back next week with David Bray, the world's most social CIO from the Federal Communications Commission on Government and Ed.
Bye-bye.